Well, King Charles delivers his first King's Speech to Parliament with bills on tougher sentencing laws, a ban on the sale of cigarettes and plans to grant new North Sea oil and gas licences. Boris Johnson denied saying let the bodies pile high during the pandemic, but his former Chief of Staff tells the COVID inquiry he did. And on this day of pomp and pageantry here in Westminster, when a monarch's in town, we'll look back at the slightly awkward side of being an MP on a day like this. And I'm joined live on the show by two Lucys. For the government, Culture Secretary Lucy Frazer, and for Labour, the shadow leader of the House of Commons, Lucy Powell. It's Tuesday, I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, today was a moment in history, the first King's Speech for 70 years, a moment when we really felt the transition between the Elizabethan age and the Carolean. But when King Charles sat in his crown of nearly 3,000 jewels and opened Parliament for the first time as monarch, it was a significant ceremonial moment. But was it a significant political moment? I'll put it this way. The King's Speech contained the most words in a monarch speech since 2005, but he announced the fewest bills in a monarch speech since 2014. The opposition would say that sounds like a lot of words and not much action. So today's speech was also defined by what wasn't in there. No legislation on plans to replace A-levels, the centrepiece of the Prime Minister's conference speech. Nothing on the regulation of artificial intelligence. Nothing on a ban on conversion therapy. Now, some more excitable members of the opposition are even saying that they now put their money on an early general election because the King didn't announce enough legislation to last a full year. Now, I'm not saying I'd go that far, but if you're looking for a Rishi reset, well, maybe you're best off pinning your hopes on the autumn statement instead. Well, our political editor, Beth Rigby, is here with us to guide us through today's events. It's always such a big moment in the parliamentary calendar, isn't it? The King's Speech. What were your sort of main takeaways?
Well, I think if we try and zoom out, what is he trying to achieve? And it is about the Rishi Sunak reset. He's running out of time before a general election and he has to shift the dial. And in that, I would say that this was a missed opportunity. On the framing of the speech, he talked a lot about long-term difficult decisions, but there was a lot of short-term election posturing within it. He talked about taking difficult decisions, but in reality, as you were saying, there were lots of pieces of legislation that he seemed to have put in the too hard to do box. And then when he talks about being a change Prime Minister, a break from the status quo, in that speech, we didn't see any new radical ideas. What we actually saw was a stress on continuity, and that's something that Number 10 themselves would say. And when I spoke to one former cabinet minister today, and this is not an irreconcilable, they said it seemed to them that he was managing, not leading. And what I would say is that without a clear clarity of messaging to voters, how can he really hope for them to tune back in?
That is a big question.
The monarch's procession to Parliament, age-old tradition, today with a new cast of characters. The first King's Speech in more than 7 decades. But even as the monarch changed, centuries of ceremonial conventions still the same. Black rod banging on the door of the Commons, reminding us of Parliament's independence from the new king. This an important milestone for the nation and for these men too. Rishi Sunak trying to put a constitutional stamp on yet another political reset in what could be his first and last King's Speech. It began with a nod to the past.
It is mindful of a legacy of service and devotion to this country set by my beloved mother, the late Queen, that I deliver this, the first King's Speech, in over 70 years.
The King's voice, but this Rishi Sunak's slogan.
My government's priority is to make the difficult but necessary long-term decisions to change this country for the better.
The rhetoric all about the long term, but in reality, this PM looking at the here and now.
This bill will support the future licensing of new oil and gas fields, helping the country to transition to net zero by 2050 without adding undue burdens on households.
Legislating for more drilling in the North Sea, even as Labour rule it out. This a clear dividing line the Conservatives will look to mine in the run-up to a general election. On law and order too, the PM trying to be tough on crime and set the ground for attacking Sir Keir Starmer's record in his legal life before politics.
A bill will be brought forward to ensure tougher sentences for the most serious offenders and increase the confidence of victims.
Mr Sunak trying to signal his priorities to the public, but there was legacy-focused legislation too, pushing through his pet project on stopping smoking.
My government will introduce legislation to create a smoke-free generation by restricting the sale of tobacco so that children currently aged 14 or younger can never be sold cigarettes. My government will, in all respects, seek to make long-term decisions in the interests of future generations.
Rishi Sunak likes to talk about long-term decisions, but the truth is that an election is perhaps a year away and he, for now, looks set to lose. So forget the rhetoric about difficult decisions for the long term of the country. The reality is that this Prime Minister is trying to frame the election and show you, the voter, clear differences between him and Keir Starmer in a bid to shift the dial. In the Commons, Sir Keir Starmer cleared this King's speech won't cut it.
We needed a King's speech that would draw a line under 13 years of Tory decline, a King's speech for national renewal and a serious plan for growth. But instead, we have a party so devoid of leadership, it is happy to follow a Home Secretary who describes homelessness as a lifestyle choice.
A PM so low on authority that the Home Secretary attempted to brief legislation around rough sleeping into the speech. And so many bits of legislation missing: conversion therapy, A-level reform, mental health, because his backbenchers have boxed him in. A momentous day done. The first King's speech in 73 years delivered, election dividing lines defined, and soon it will be for the voters to decide. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Westminster.
Beth Rigby's report there. Well, we're joined now by our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, who's been digging through the detail of that speech today. Is there anything in particular that's caught your eye?
Sophie, across the huge amount of detail that you get on days like this, one subplot has turned out to be particularly fascinating. And Beth briefly mentioned it at the end of her report, and it's the one to do with Home Secretary Suella Braverman. Through the weekend, we at Sky News were being told that a plan to find the homeless who have tents, to ban charities from giving tents to the homeless, was going to be in the King's speech. In fact, Sophie, we were being told that as recently as this morning. But when the King's speech announced the bills and the documents alongside those were released, there was no mention of it, nowhere. And what appears to have happened in the last few days is, as we've been seeing on our screens, cabinet ministers, other cabinet ministers, clearly deeply uncomfortable with both the plan and the language around the plan that Suella Braverman has been using, talking about the homeless as a lifestyle choice. Now, it had looked all weekend like the Prime Minister was using Suella Braverman in order to catch attention, in order to set the agenda, create dividing lines, doing deliberately controversial things. It's now starting to look like a lot of that was completely off script. Tonight it's emerged that the plans that were going to be in the criminal justice bill were going to be published tomorrow. The legislation was going to come out tomorrow, and they've had to delay that for some time because there has been such a backlash at the top of government over the way that Suella Braverman has operated and has conducted herself. You could hear in the chamber Keir Starmer, Chris Bryant, Labour MP, bringing this up. It's a sore point. Rishi Sunak looks like he depends on Suella Braverman to create attention, to beat a path. He also looks like he's having problems with Suella Braverman as Home Secretary, doing things he doesn't want to see. This is an issue. It's hard to see how it's resolved.
Really interesting. And it'd be interesting to see, as you say, in the coming days, whether it actually magically appears in legislation or if we just never hear anything of it again. Sam, thank you very much for that update. Well, alongside the pomp and the pageantry, the third P today was protest. Well, anti-monarchy crowds gathered in Whitehall to give King Charles's carriage their own special welcome. The organisers, Republic, claimed hundreds of people turned up to protest. They said the event was not compatible with democracy. Well, you've heard them shouting, "Not my king." They also shouted, "What a waste of money," and "Down with the crown." Minority of people, but a vocal minority today. Well, I'm joined now by the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, Lucy Frazer. Great to have you on the programme today. Thanks for being with us.
Good to be here.
So the King's speech contained the most words in a monarch's speech since 2005, but the fewest bills since 2014. A lot of words, but not much action.
I wouldn't agree with that. I think what it did was build on a foundation of work that we've already set in train. So one of our big priorities is ensuring that we get down the cost of living, we get inflation down. You've seen that, we grow the economy. And there were bills in there to grow the economy. What we've said we're going to do is to ensure that we protect the NHS, and we've got a workforce plan to do that. And so what you saw was protecting communities and making our streets safer.
And there's a bit on your brief as well, legislation to remove the threat of unlimited fines for newspapers that don't sign up to a particular press regulator. I mean, is that really the biggest priority for Brits ahead of an election?
Well, that's a few clauses in a media bill. And what the media bill does is make sure that our media is ready for this new technological age, that our public service broadcasters, get the prominence that they need in the new smartphone age. It makes sure that, you can get the channels that you want on radio and your smart speaker. And yes, it is really important that we bring in Section 40, because what it does is preserve the freedom of the press. And the freedom of the press is one of our tenets of democracy.
Sounds a bit like a bung to the newspapers ahead of a general election campaign.
It's absolutely not. It's a really, really important part of our democracy to ensure that newspapers can publish without fear of having a costs order against them, even when they win. It's been a manifesto commitment in a number of our manifestos, and now we're able to bring it forward because we've got the media bill being introduced very shortly.
And perhaps some of the strongest headlines are around crime, tougher sentences for the most serious sexual offences. But the reality, of course, is that prisons are full. And I just want to talk about a bit that, you're not shouting about published today, this sentence here. The government will introduce a presumption in favour of a suspended sentence for custodial sentences of less than a year. So in other words, if you get a sentence of less than a year, as many, for example, stalkers do, you're not going to go to jail. I mean, you say you're tough on crime, but if you look at the detail, it feels like it just crumbles.
I wouldn't agree with that. I think what we're doing is striking the right balance for those people who need to go to prison, who have committed really heinous offences. So we're increasing the sentences for people who have committed murder and rape together. And they will not. Their whole life sentence means a whole life sentence. So that's at one end of the spectrum. And I think that's what victims feel they need and they absolutely deserve. And then you mentioned shorter sentences. So I was a justice minister for a number of years. And I was prisons minister. And what I saw that people were committing crimes, low-level crimes, and they were going in and out of prison, and it was just this revolving door because they weren't in long enough to be rehabilitated.
At the same time, though, last year, 11,000 people were jailed for 12 months or less for harassment, stalking, image-based abuse. Are you saying that these people don't deserve custodial sentences?
Well, of course, those are serious offences and victims will want to see justice. But what we need to ensure as well is that we rehabilitate people, because What we need to do ensure is that we get crime down. 80% of people in our prisons have been in our prisons before. So we're just seeing the same people coming through. And what we know is that if you get someone a job, if you get someone a home, and if you get them off drugs, they're less likely to commit offences. We can do that if they're not in and out of prison the whole time. When they go into prison, they lose their home, they lose their job, they often lose their contacts to their family. And so what we want to ensure is that we break that cycle to protect communities and make them safer.
Now, I wondered if there's something you could clear up for me. Sam Coates was just talking about it earlier. Right, over the last week, the Home Secretary has spent an awful lot of time talking about stopping tents that are used by homeless people. But there's nothing in the King's Speech on it, no legislation. So what's going on? Is she just freelancing? What's happening?
I haven't been in extensive conversations with the Home Secretary, as you have mentioned.
Come on, you must have seen the headlines. You've seen the comments.
Yes, you asked me what was going on. What I think is going on is that the government is absolutely committed to tackling rough sleeping and has done a number of things in order to tackle what is a very, very serious issue in our society. So I mentioned I was Prisons Minister. One of the things that I'm really proud of that I did was work to ensure when people come out of prison, they get a home, as I mentioned. Otherwise,
they're more likely
with these
tents? Is this just disappeared? Is it happening? Is it not happening? It's a bit shambolic.
Well, I've been...
You don't know.
I've been focusing on the bills that I've got in the King's Speech. Those are the media bill, which we've talked about, and a bill for football regulation. If you specifically want to talk about tents and what's happening with, I suggest you have that conversation with the
Home Secretary, if you're listening. Lucy said you need to get on the show, so yeah, let's do it. I just want to talk about the Home Secretary. I just want to read out a tweet by the Conservative MP Richard Graham. He's tweeted today to say, tone matters. It's our duty to calm, not inflame, to reduce, not increase tensions. The language of the Home Secretary, whether on tents or on marches, is unhelpful to cohesion in our communities and is not in my name. He's not the only one. I just want to play, if I may, a little clip of Sayeeda Warsi, the Conservative peer who was on this programme last night. This is what she had to say.
I think she's dangerous and she's divisive. If you look at her rhetoric, it is always about pitching A against B. I've said this before. We have now, sadly, some of my colleagues in government who project as patriots, but they are indeed arsonists. They set this country alight. They pit community against community. They create these fires, and that is not the job of a government. The job of a government is to keep us all safe, and you do that by creating a sense of ease, not by fighting culture wars.
Do you agree with Sayeeda Warsi?
I agree that tone matters in a debate, and I agree that, well, what I think is that what people want us to do is to take action on the things that matter to them. On this particular matter...
Do you think the Home Secretary has got the tone right?
I think she expresses views on things that she cares about, and what she's talking about is we need to ensure that we need to tackle rough sleeping. It's inappropriate that people are sleeping on the streets. There are underlying problems. I wouldn't have used the language that the Home Secretary used. These are serious issues that we need to tackle, and the issue we need to tackle is to ensure that we eradicate rough sleeping, and that is what the government is absolutely committed to doing.
I want to talk to you a little bit about the COVID inquiry, if I may, as well, which is, it hasn't been the main headlines today because of the King's Speech, but it's rumbling on. Today, Eddie Lister, one of Boris Johnson's closest advisors at the COVID inquiry today. Now, he said that Boris Johnson did say he would rather let the bodies pile high than impose another lockdown in September 2020. Now, Boris Johnson has denied saying that several times. Is Boris Johnson a liar?
So you start off by saying that we're going to talk about the COVID inquiry. We've set up an inquiry to understand some really serious issues, and that's what I think we should be focusing on, not who said what when.
Well, what the Prime Minister said at the time is quite important, isn't it? That's the whole...
Well, what is important...
guides everything.
What is important and what this inquiry is set up to do is to learn lessons for the future. In the event that we had another COVID pandemic or other pandemic, how would we tackle it? A number of people lost their lives during the pandemic. The government had to make very serious decisions in serious times. And we rightly set up the inquiry to examine those things, and that's exactly what it's doing.
Is Boris Johnson a liar?
Boris Johnson was the Prime Minister of this country. He did a number of things that have made our country, we voted for Brexit. He delivered Brexit.
Sounds like a Wikipedia entry than an answer.
He was obviously the Prime Minister during the pandemic, and he got a vaccine before any other country. So he achieved a great deal. Obviously, given the circumstances of his resignation, I think he admitted he made some mistakes as well.
OK, thank you very much. Lucy Frazer on the programme this evening. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Well, in a moment, we will be hearing from Labour on the King's Speech. But first, I just want to take a listen to Theresa May's intervention in today's debate.
I was rather surprised recently when I received an email from, in the name of my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, sent out, I think, by the Conservative Party, where it said the following. From net zero to HS2, smoking to education, we're going to tackle the challenges that other politicians have been afraid to even talk about. Now, since I read that, I've been racking my brains as to which Prime Minister it was put net zero in 2050 into legislation. Answers on a postcard, please. What we need to do now is press the accelerator on transition to a green economy, not try to draw back.
Well, that was Theresa May's verdict on today's King's Speech. We're joined now by the Shadow Leader of the House of Commons, Lucy Powell. Good to have you on the show. What's your verdict on the speech?
Well, it's a very thin King's Speech. I think that's most of what your commentators have been saying today. I mean, this is Rishi Sunak's first King's Speech, probably his only King's Speech. It's his one chance to really change this country and change the laws of the country. And what we've been presented with today is very, very thin, tinkering at the edges, things that don't even need legislating for anyway, or things that are just political stunts. So I think it's kind of pretty pathetic, really, and it's a symptom that this government has now given up on governing altogether.
At the same time, you know, some of the proposals announced today, you would imagine would poll pretty well. You know, banning smoking for future generations, longer prison sentences for serious sexual offences. What in the King's Speech today do you actually disagree with?
Well, we disagree with their plans for North Sea gas and oil, because that's not going to do anything for bills.
So you'd have no new oil and gas licences?
We've said we'd have no new gas licences. They don't even need this bill to do that anyway. We have regular licensing rounds already, so even under its own terms, they don't even need to do this bill. But as the Energy Secretary said yesterday, it won't take a penny off people's bills. So what are they doing it for? It won't give us energy security either. The only way we will get energy security and that we will lower people's bills is by going further and faster on renewables, and that's what Labour would be doing right now.
So there's a difference of opinion on oil and gas licences. Is there anything else you disagree with, or do you think that, you know, most of it you just do the sort of similar stuff?
Well, we wouldn't do similar stuff. You know, we're fizzing with plans about how we're going to deal with the cost of living.
What's the biggest difference in policy then?
Well, we've got a whole agenda of what we would be doing right now, which is coherent as well, dealing with the cost of living.
How would you do that then?
Windfall tax, bringing in energy security.
Windfall tax as well,
They haven't. It's not a real proper windfall tax. We'd be taking action to bring down waiting lists, bringing tax changes on non-dom status to get more doctors and nurses. We would be changing the VAT rules on private schools to get more teachers into schools. We've got a whole other agenda on crime and dealing with violence against women and girls. We would be taking on the water bosses to stop them polluting our rivers. We'd be bringing in bus reform and a rail reform bill. There's a whole load of other things that we would be doing now that would actually, I think, really address the challenges that this country is facing. And what we've seen today is a hodgepodge of really small, very small fry measures, things, some of which are uncontroversial, some of which are carryover bills, some of which don't need doing anyway.
So what's the
they
one
really don't
big transformational policy? Because look, I get what you mean, like VAT on private schools. Lots of people would agree with that, but it's like a couple of billion here and there, which I know, you know, sounds like a lot. But if you're talking about transforming the country and being completely different to the Conservatives, what is the big thing? If I say one big thing, clear water.
Well, as if there was like one big thing. There's a whole agenda which I've just set out. But you know, we've said we would bring in an Energy Independence Act that would set up Great British Energy, would lower bills, it would take us further and faster on renewables. That's just one thing that sets us apart from what they're announcing today.
I want to talk to you a bit about protests, if I may, because we have had a statement from Sir Mark Rowley, the head of the Met Police, saying that they're looking at intelligence around the protest that is planned for Saturday, the pro-Palestinian march, to see if they need to request for it to be banned. Now, 3 trade union leaders, Fire Brigades Union, National Education Union, RMT, Rail Union, are attending these protests. Do you think it should go ahead?
Well, look, these are operationally independent decisions. It is a matter for the police, and we fully support the police in whatever decision they come to. And that is something that they have to work out, both based on the intelligence that they have
they've
before
said it
us.
shouldn't go ahead.
Yeah,
they?
well,
So that's what you think.
we support the police. If that's what they say, if that's what they say, then that's what should happen. But that's up to them to decide. And I think it is based not just on their intelligence, but whether they've got the capacity to really police this weekend, when there's a lot of other events they've got to police, particularly Remembrance Sunday.
Is it right that Labour MPs have been told not to attend pro-Palestinian marches?
Well, I don't think that's what people have been specifically told.
So that's not true?
Well, I don't know exactly what people... I don't know what you're referring to there, but obviously people are free to do what they want. But look,
Labour
I think
MPs in council have been advised not to attend pro-Palestinian marches.
Well, I'm not sure. But look, we're really clear that we're not a party of protest. We're a party that's aspiring to be the party of government. We've got a clear agenda that we want to deliver in government that we've just discussed, and we want to project that, and that's what we've been doing. That's what Keir Starmer's been doing as leader of the Labour Party, showing that we've changed as a Labour Party. We're not a party of protest. We're a party that wants to govern. So that's why I wouldn't go on a protest.
Many people, the strength of feeling so high.
Oh, I know the strength of feeling is incredibly high, and of course people have the right to go on protest and express themselves. Of course people want to express that because they're seeing it on their TV screens every evening. But as a Member of Parliament, I have other influence and other power available to me in order to make my views known. I can raise that directly with the government, I can raise that in Parliament, I can raise that within the Labour Party. So I don't feel that I personally need to go on a protest to make my views known. But I absolutely understand the strength of feeling and that people want to express that.
OK, Lucy Powell, thank you very much. Lucy Powell there. BBC show today, still to come on the Politics Hub. Let the bodies pile high. The COVID inquiry hears evidence that Boris Johnson did say it. Anything to avoid another lockdown. That is next.
Big stories don't always come from big cities. I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent, and this is where I grew up. We can reveal that the driver who hit Harry Dunn is 42-year-old Anne Sakoulas.
Just met the President and we never thought we'd get this far.
This is what they're up against, that the wind is the really big problems. It is back-breaking work and the smoke is thick. It's been working well. Water levels are dropping, but no one knows what impact further rain will have. What would you do if this place wasn't open? We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
It's really scary. We're terrified.
In this community, I'm told that everybody knows someone affected by COVID.
Hopefully this will be the last wave.
I never knew they would make it. It's amazing.
Change seems tantalisingly close in this corner of the UK. Wales was the first to introduce the plastic bag charge. This is my patch, my specialism. It's also my home.
5 of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
Hello, welcome back. Well, to the COVID inquiry now. Today, the inquiry heard from the former Downing Street Chief of Staff, Eddie Lister, who said that Boris Johnson did say he would rather let the bodies pile high than impose another lockdown. The inquiry also saw messages from Simon Case, sent before he was appointed as Cabinet Secretary by Boris Johnson, that he'd never seen a bunch of people less well-equipped to run a country. Sky's political correspondent Tamara Cohen reports.
This inquiry has been called the trial of Boris Johnson, with intense criticism of the dithering and dysfunction at the heart of his government. One of the most incendiary claims made about the former Prime Minister during the pandemic is that he once said he'd prefer to let the bodies pile high than have a second lockdown. Today, his former Chief of Staff reveals it was true. He'd heard it. His statement to the inquiry states, "The R number was rising. A circuit breaker was proposed in response to this increase, and the Health Secretary was pushing hard for this to take place. However, the opposition to any form of lockdown was intense. I remember the PM saying in September 2020 that he would rather let the bodies pile high than impose another lockdown." Asked about it today, Lord Lister said this.
We'd had the summer. Hospitality had opened up. There was immense pressure to keep the economy moving forward. This was the debate that was going on. Do you now lock down or do you keep going?
Boris Johnson has always denied making the comment after a newspaper published the claim 6 months later. At the time, his cabinet ministers were told to deny it.
It's not true. It's been categorically denied by practically everyone. We're getting into the sort of comedy chapter now of these gossip and stories.
And Johnson was categorical when Keir Starmer asked him about it in Parliament.
Prime Minister.
No, Mr. Speaker, and I think the right honourable gentleman is a lawyer, I'm given to understand. I think that if he's going to repeat allegations like that, he should come to this House and substantiate those allegations.
The quote was publicly attributed to the Prime Minister 2 years ago by Dominic Cummings, after the two had a dramatic falling out. What's so significant about what we've just heard is that Lord Lister remains an ally of Boris Johnson. They worked together for more than a decade, and he was supportive of Boris Johnson in his evidence, saying that the decisions around lockdown were extremely difficult and, understandably, tensions were running high. Boris Johnson's spokesman said he'd be giving his evidence to the inquiry in due course. Just a comment in the heat of the moment, but one that appears to reveal so much more. Tamara Cohen, Sky News.
Tamara Cohen there. Still to come on the Politics Hub. As Benjamin Netanyahu says that Israel will take overall security responsibility in Gaza indefinitely. Sky News is the first UK news organisation to speak to a member of Israel's 5-man war cabinet. Ron Dermer, Minister for Strategic Affairs, is next. Hello, welcome back. Well, it is a month since Hamas launched their attack on Israel. And today we are joined by Ron Dermer, the Minister for Strategic Affairs, someone who is known as Bibi's brain. He's so close to the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. The Israeli Minister of Strategic Affairs sits on the five-man Israel War Cabinet. It's the first UK interview with a member of that cabinet, and I'm pleased to say he joins us now on this programme. Thank you very much for being with us this evening.
Good to be with you, Sophie.
It's exactly a month since Hamas entered Israel and murdered hundreds of people, from people attending a peace festival to going house to house, murdering families and babies as well. 1 month on, how do you reflect on that event and the impact it's had on the people of Israel?
Well, it was the worst attack against the Jewish people since the Holocaust. And, you know, for Israel, we're used to wars and we're used to terror attacks over time, but we've never seen a slaughter like this, a wanton slaughter, children being killed in front of their parents, parents being killed in front of their children, people being burnt alive, the wanton destruction and these atrocious crimes that were committed by Hamas. And I think early on, the President of the United States said it was worse than ISIS. I think the Chancellor of Germany said it was like Nazis. And I said there's a difference. You know, the Nazis hid their crimes from the world. They tried to con the world into thinking they weren't doing what they were doing. And even Stalin hid his crimes from the world. These people were wearing GoPros. They were like Nazis with GoPros, running through these towns and villages, peaceful communities, killing everything in their path and taking 240 of our citizens hostage and now holding them in Gaza. So it was a horrific crime, and Israel, like any self-respecting nation, is going to respond and is going to ensure that we dismantle Hamas's military infrastructure in Gaza, that we end its political rule in Gaza, and that we ensure that Gaza no longer presents and poses a threat to the state of Israel. This round, Sophie, that we're having with Gaza, you've been following it for many years. We've had many rounds in Gaza. This round is going to be the last round.
I want to talk a bit about your response in a moment, but just first, is there going to be an investigation into the complete intelligence failure that missed the attacks by Hamas?
For sure. Israel has a long history of investigating and getting to the bottom of all these issues, and there's going to be a lot of questions that people are going to have, rightly so. And everybody, I think, wants to get answers, and certainly the people of Israel deserve those answers. Okay. But we'll do that after the war. Right now, we're focused on prosecuting the war, winning the war, because we have no choice. We cannot allow something like this to happen on our border. The people of Israel are united and determined to remove this threat, and that goes across the political spectrum in Israel, and I think it's reflected in the War Cabinet, where you have a broad range of opinion. But on this issue, eliminating Hamas, we are united.
Well, let's talk about eliminating Hamas. You say your aim is to eliminate Hamas, to destroy Hamas. So what is your estimate for the number of Hamas fighters that you've killed?
Several thousand. I can't give you the specific estimate, but it's definitely north of 3,000, maybe close to 4,000 already. There were also many in that initial attack that obviously we paid a horrific price, but we repelled and killed many of the Hamas fighters who came in. But since that time, we've killed many, as I said, several thousands. The reason why I can't give you a specific number is that Hamas operates, as I'm sure you and your viewers know, in this underground terror tunnel network. And so when we attack those tunnels and we destroy those tunnels and those tunnels collapse, it's not clear exactly how many terrorists there are there. But it's many hundreds and over thousands now since our ground operation began. In fact, when our ground operation began, we've had fewer civilians who've been killed and actually many more terrorists who've been killed.
Well, let's talk about the civilians, shall we? 3,000 to 4,000, you say, roughly your estimate for Hamas operatives.
At least.
Now, the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry estimates that 10,000 civilians have been killed in Gaza since the October 7th attacks. What's your estimate for the number of civilians in Gaza who have been killed?
I don't know the actual estimate. I know that in previous rounds, we've heard that there were this or that number of civilians, and then when all was said and done,
how can you not know? You must have some kind of estimate.
I don't know how many people were killed in Gaza. I don't know how many terrorists were killed in Gaza.
How can you give me an estimate, a rough estimate? I understand, for the number of Hamas fighters and not an estimate for the number of civilians. Is it something that you're uncomfortable with?
No, it's not, because I just don't know. Because what happens when you have a military unit that's going through an area and they may find out, 30 terrorists came out to attack them and the 30 terrorists were killed, and that would come back to us. But exactly how many civilians, I know what the Gaza Health Ministry, which is run by Hamas, has reported. I don't know if that's true, if it's not true. I know in past when they've tried to say how many of them are civilians and how many of them are fighters, they've said, it's 80% or 90% civilians, and it turns out it's almost 50-50. So I don't know. We'll have to wait. I guess we'll get the facts later. But listen, every civilian who is killed is a tragedy.
Surely you must have a better grip on the number of civilians who are losing their lives.
I really don't, Sophie. You're welcome to go and speak to the people in Gaza if you know better than I do. I mean, I'm just in Israel's war cabinet, so what do I know? I can't tell you the number of people. What I can tell you that every civilian who is killed in Gaza is a tragedy. And they are the unintended consequence of legitimate warfare. It happens in every war, particularly in a war where we're dealing with an enemy that uses their own civilians as human shields, as a matter of policy, that uses hospitals, schools, mosques, any kind of civilian facility to ensure that they keep their civilians in harm's way. That's what they feel is their protection. And I think it's a double war crime. Not only do they target us, which they have, as you said, on that horrific day on October 7th, but since that day, they fired about 10,000 rockets at Israel. Just a few minutes ago, we had to go to a bomb shelter here in Tel Aviv because there was another rocket that was fired at Israel. So they perpetrate a double war crime. They target our civilians, and then they hide and embed themselves in civilian areas. And so it's very difficult for a country like Israel that does everything to get people out of harm's way to tell them, go to the south, get out of all of those areas of conflict. And Hamas is doing everything to keep them in harm's way because they don't care at all about the civilians in Gaza. And I think it's a tragedy for the Palestinians, and it's also a tragedy for Israel.
If you can't give me the number for the estimate for number of civilians who've lost their lives in Gaza, as you said, the Hamas estimate is 10,000. So say 3,000 Hamas operatives losing their lives. Are you comfortable with that ratio? Around 3 civilians dead for every
First of all, I don't even
Hamas
know what
operative.
that means. I don't know what that means, Sophie, with a ratio. 8 million Germans died in World War II and 400,000 Americans did. I don't know how many Brits did, but that means 20 times as many Germans died as Americans. Does that mean that somehow the Nazis were right and the Americans were wrong? That has nothing to do with the laws of war, and it has nothing to do with proportionality. I'm not comfortable with any civilian being killed, but I'll tell you what I'm even less comfortable with, that we have on our border a terror organization that seeks the destruction of Israel. And what they did on October 7th has to be answered by Israel, because it's not just a threat to Israel. It is a threat to all of civilization. We cannot allow such an act of barbarism to go unanswered, and we cannot give them immunity with the use of human shields, because what happens is they use the human shields to try to turn public opinion against Israel, because they're hoping that you're going to focus all the time on the civilians. And I don't have a problem with you focusing on the civilians, because I think it's a tragedy. But the blame for that tragedy should be put squarely at the feet of a terror organization like Hamas. Because the question, and I'm sure you feel this, Sophie, the same way, I'm sure you feel it's immoral to use civilians as human shields, just as every decent person does. The question is it gonna, let me just finish the sentence and I'll answer what you have to say. The question is not whether it's immoral. The question, is it effective? Is it an effective tactic of war? Will the international media, will politicians around the world blame Israel for these civilians so that it will encourage Hamas and other terror organizations around the world to say, the focus of the international media is not going to be on people building terror tunnels under hospitals and using people as human shields. It's going to be to blame the democratic country that is fighting a war of self-defense, the most legitimate war of self-defense, even one that unfortunately leads to civilian casualty.
I am keen to talk about what happens after the conflict, because I understand that you're focusing now on the military and on the war itself. But of course, if there's to be any chance of peace for the Israelis and the Palestinians, there has to be a thought of what happens when the fighting stops. Who do you see governing Gaza?
Well, I think it'll be the Palestinians that are going to govern Gaza. Who those Palestinians will be, I don't know. I know who they're not going to be. It's not going to be Hamas. We're going to have to wipe out and eliminate, as I said, not only Hamas's military infrastructure, but end their rule of Gaza. And hopefully the Palestinians eventually will be able to choose a leadership that is committed to peaceful coexistence with Israel and not one that is determined to destroy Israel. And that also teaches their children to live at peace with Israel and doesn't demonize Jews and demonize Israel and raise a whole generation with this wild idea for the destruction of Israel and the murder of Jews.
If I may, just to focus again on the plans for the future, the path to peace, if you like. Do you believe there should be an independent state of Palestine?
The question that you have on the question of a state is, and the Prime Minister has said it many times, he says the Palestinians should have all the powers to govern themselves, but none of the powers that could threaten Israel. When you talk about a state, you have to deal with certain powers. Do they have an army? Do we want Palestinians to have an army that could threaten Israel? Do they control the airspace? Do they control the borders? Can they make military pacts with other countries like Iran?
Forgive me,
so
I don't understand the answer, forgive me. Do you believe there should be an independent state of Palestine?
Yeah, because it's not, because you want a yes or no answer, but it's not a yes or no answer, because there are certain limits on sovereignty that has to be put in place, because Israel faces unique security threats that no other country faces. So when I speak to people and I say, well, you for a two-state solution, most people are. And then I ask them, wait a second, do you believe that the Palestinians should have an army? No, they don't think that.
Because it's an important question, because America and the UK both say they do believe in a two-state solution. Is that just not credible? Are they wrong?
I think they also are very clear about the restrictions that have to be placed on the certain sovereign powers of the Palestinian state that they support that would not endanger Israel. And I think the formula we have to get to in substance is one that will give them all the powers that they need for self-determination to govern their own lives. Israel doesn't want to govern them, but none of the powers that can be used to threaten Israel. And that's a serious problem, and it requires a serious discussion to figure out how you achieve that outcome.
Here in the UK, as in many countries around the world, thousands of people have been taken to the streets to protest on pro-Palestinian marches. You know, when you see those crowds of people in the United Kingdom, what goes through your mind?
I just think it's an indictment, frankly, of higher educational system. It reminds me of the debate in the Oxford Student Union in 1933 that I read about in history 10 days after Hitler came to power. And there was a resolution that was passed in the Oxford Student Union that this House would not under any circumstances fight for king and country. And I think that sent a very powerful message to Hitler of what was happening in England at the time. And it was a very bad message. Churchill later wrote about it. But I think it's shameful, because I don't think that those people who are protesting in the streets, they're not calling for peace. They're not asking about the intricacies of a two-state solution. What they support is the destruction of the one and only Jewish state. And that's shameful. And I'm very glad that your prime minister has been very supportive of Israel from the beginning. And yes, like him, Israel wants to do everything to keep civilians out of harm's way. And we want to get humanitarian goods into there. But you have to look at this in the eye, and you have to ask those protesters, do they support the existence of a Jewish state? And what you'll find is 95% of those people supporting, the answer is no. And Israel is not going to commit suicide because you have thousands of people protesting against it in England. It's not going to happen. We're going to defend ourselves, and we're going to secure our future.
Now, I know, of course, there'll be lots of people watching this programme who disagree very strongly with what you say, people who perhaps been on those protests again.
Well, send a reporter to ask them. Send a reporter to ask them. Ask them what they think about Israel. See if a single one will say, yes, we support Israel's right to exist, because that's not what I see. That's not what I see of those people when they say, free Palestine from the river to the sea. That's a call for genocide, for policide, the destruction of a state, and genocide against the Jewish people. We've been here before. The birth of Israel gave the Jewish people the power to fight back. That's what's changed. It hasn't ended hatred towards the Jews, but it has given us the power to fight back. When you have people going with signs that says Palestine from the river to the sea, that is incitement to genocide, which is a war crime. And it should not be tolerated, even if it goes in your higher educational systems or any other parts of Britain. It's wrong, and it should be condemned forthrightly. And I think that your government, your current government, is doing that, and I appreciate it. And I think the head of your Labour Party had some very strong statements also in support of Israel's right to defend itself at the beginning of the war. And I appreciate it, which is a big difference from what happened with Jeremy Corbyn, who was an anti-Semite, who was the head of one of your Labour parties, and I'm glad he was spit out by the British public.
OK, and I know that Jeremy Corbyn would disagree. It's my job to say.
He can disagree, but he called
description.
Hezbollah and Hamas his friends.
OK.
He called the people who
We're out of
murdered
time.
1,400 women, children, and Israelis and took 240 people hostage his friends. They are not they may be his friends, but they're Israel's enemies, and they should be the enemies of all the civilized world.
We're out of time. Ron Dermer, strong words from Ron Dermer there. War crimes being committed on those marches, according to him. Thank you for being on the Politics Hub. Still to come on the programme this evening. We're going to be wrapping up the day's politics with Sky's political team with some final thoughts on the King's speech after the break.
I mean, I was suffering for 4 years with seemingly unrelated symptoms of perimenopause, so brain fog, itchy skin, exhaustion, heart palpitations. I thought I was going through early onset dementia because I was forgetting words. And I had to leave my job because I just couldn't focus at work, couldn't concentrate. So it took me 4 years going back and forward to different specialists and doctors to finally get the right diagnosis, which was perimenopause, a word I'd never heard of. And it was only then when I realised what had been going on and that I wasn't going mad, I got quite angry. So I set up the Latte Lounge as an online platform to support women like me who felt very alone to get the right support, information and signposting and diagnosis. Now, for me, I was lucky. My father is a retired breast cancer specialist now, and he was the one that said, I think this is your hormones and you need to go and see a gynaecologist who, specialises in menopause. We have a symptom checklist on our website. I've been campaigning with Diane Danzibrink, who's the founder of the Make Menopause Matter campaign. We've been campaigning for a long time to get menopause on the school curriculum, which has now happened in England. Workplace policies in place, which is now happening, and I do a lot of work with workplaces. And also for GPs, it's the catch-up training for GPs, because menopause, believe it or not, was not really included on the medical school curriculum. So print a symptom checklist off, take that to your doctor and say, look, I think I'm going through all these symptoms and I'd like to discuss my options. And that may be something like hormone replacement therapy, which was the missing piece for me. But there's also lots of lifestyle changes and tweaks you can make. And I'm obviously glad that so many celebrities like Naomi are talking about this, because early menopause affects 1 in 100 women under 40, 1 in 1,000 under 30, and 1 in 10,000 under 20. And it can be absolutely devastating. Once we open up these conversations, which is what I've been doing a lot with workplaces, it means you're breaking down the taboo, you're normalising the conversation, and you're supporting employers to keep women in the workplace so we can thrive. We don't want to just, survive each day. We actually want to live life to the full. Life's not over after 40 and 50. You're a testament to that. We're just beginning.
Let's talk about football.
Hello, welcome back. It's been a bit of a roller coaster show today. We're going to focus now on the King's speech because as MPs walk from the Commons to the Lords to hear the speech, they traditionally pair up and they walk alongside their opposite number, someone on the opposition benches, for a chat. It's meant to be an exchange of non-partisan pleasantries, but sometimes they just can't help themselves, can they? Maybe it's a lack of social skills, maybe it's acrimony, but things get a bit, orcs. So we thought we'd bring you some of the more uncomfortable examples. Oh, so awkward, some of those, aren't they? Beth Rugby and Sam Coates are here. You know who they are, I don't need to introduce them. I think that Boris Johnson, Jeremy Corbyn was my particular favourite.
Excruciating. I remember packaging that. It was like genuinely interesting television because the dislike for each other was so plain to see as they walked through.
In contrast, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer seem to be chatting away.
They're quite similar. And I think that comes across. You know, they're both kind of quite technocrat. They're both not necessarily got politics in every bit of their DNA. There's a lot to compare.
Who do you reckon was the worst then? I mean, I have to say, Theresa May, she wasn't the best at small talk, was she?
Well, not with any of us.
No,
she
wasn't
hard.
the best at small talk. And I think Jeremy Corbyn didn't want to do small talk with fellow politicians he didn't much like.
Just didn't bother at all. It is incredibly awkward, I have to say, when you see those ones as well. I wish I had more time with both of you. We've been so... it's been such a busy show with so many interviews. This is the bit I was most looking forward to be honest, sitting here with Beth and Sam.
And I've always wanted to be in the panel, so I feel like I've arrived.
Panel.
We planned
all our every night.
We planned all our thoughts, so you're not going to get them now.
Maybe we should do it. We're getting a countdown and we're out of time.
Out of time.
Maybe we're going to try and squeeze this on again. See you tomorrow, 7 p.m. Up next, it is SJ with the UK Tonight.